Night Shift at the Hospital. Confronting Hidden Evil. Part 5. Spectral Echoes. The nights that followed Hannah's confrontation with Dr. Clark were anything but ordinary. The hospital, already a place of life and death entwined, had taken on a new and deeply unsettling aura. Whispers moved through its halls like a bitter wind. It was as if the walls themselves remembered every tragedy, every broken soul. As the clock struck midnight each night, the air thickened with something Hannah couldn't name but could feel like icy hands wrapping around her spine. Hannah walked her usual route, clipboard in hand, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Her senses were on high alert, every creak and groan of the building seemed amplified. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced and stretched. She paused near the east wing, where the air felt colder, denser. She took a deep breath and forced herself to move forward, but the chill refused to leave. It was on one of these nights, as she was nearing the end of her shift, that it happened. She had just finished checking on a patient when she heard a faint, distant cry. It was the unmistakable wail of a baby, echoing down the hallway. Her heart stopped. She turned, straining to hear. The sound was soft at first, almost gentle, but it grew louder, more desperate, as if it were calling to her. No, she whispered, shaking her head. This can't be happening. But it was. The cry seemed to move, drifting from one end of the hallway to the other, like a cruel game of hide and seek. Hannah's hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard tighter. Who's there? She called out, her voice echoing back at her. The only response was a mournful cry, now tinged with a sorrow that sent a shiver down her spine. She took hesitant steps toward the source of the sound, her heart pounding. As she turned the corner, she felt a rush of cold air, so cold it made her breath visible. Her fingers were numb, her skin prickling. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick with a presence she couldn't see. The cry faded, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Hannah's pulse thundered in her ears, and for a moment she felt as though the hospital was holding its breath, waiting. Snap out of it, Hannah, she muttered, trying to shake off the fear. But deep down she knew it was no hallucination. Whatever haunted this place was very real. The next night, Laura, another nurse and one of Hannah's few confidantes, found her in the break room. Laura's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. You heard it, didn't you? She whispered, her voice shaking. Hannah nodded, her throat dry. The baby's cry. Laura's hands trembled as she took a sip of her coffee. I've heard it too. Last night, it was right outside room 14. I thought I was losing my mind. You know, Hannah said, her voice steadier than she felt. There's something here, something. Restless Laura looked around as if the shadows might be listening. It's not just a cry, she said, her voice dropping lower. I've seen things, shadows that move when there's no one there. Cold spots. And last night, I felt someone touch me. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. The two women sat in silence, the weight of their shared fear pressing down on them. It was one thing to hear rumors, to dismiss stories as the overactive imaginations of a stressed staff. It was another to experience it themselves. What do we do? Laura asked, her voice small. Hannah stared into her coffee, her mind racing. We have to find out what's going on, she said, the resolve in her voice surprising even her. We can't ignore it. Whatever it is, it's not going away. Their resolve was tested that night. As they made their rounds, the hospital seemed to come alive with whispers and movement just beyond their sight. Lights flickered and dimmed. The temperature dropped suddenly, leaving frost on the windows. Hannah and Laura moved together, their footsteps hesitant but determined. They had to know. As they passed the maternity ward, the air grew thick with a suffocating cold. Shadows gathered at the edges of their vision, twisting and shifting. Do you see that? Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. I see it, Hannah replied, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The shadows coalesced, forming shapes that almost but not quite resembled people. Faces flickered in and out of existence, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. The temperature plummeted further and the shadows surged forward. The two women stumbled back, their backs pressed against the wall. Go away, Hannah shouted, her voice trembling. The shadows paused, as if considering her words, before slowly receding into the darkness. The oppressive cold lifted, but the air remained heavy with an unspoken threat. They're trapped, Laura said, her voice breaking. Whatever they are, they can't leave, Hannah nodded, her mind racing. The spectral woman's plea echoed in her mind, find him whatever was haunting the hospital. It wasn't just random. There was a reason, a purpose, and if they were going to survive, they had to understand it. Over the next few nights, the encounters grew more frequent and more intense. The baby's cries became a constant presence, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening. Hannah awoke one night to find her room bathed in cold, pale light. She saw the outline of a woman standing at the foot of her bed, her features obscured but her sorrow palpable. "Why can't I rest?" the woman whispered before vanishing into thin air. Hannah's days were spent in a haze of exhaustion and fear. She and Laura scoured the hospital's old records, looking for any hint of what could be causing the hauntings. They found stories of mothers who had died in childbirth, of children who never took their first breath. The hospital had a long, tragic history, a history that refused to be forgotten. One night, as they searched through dusty files in the basement, a cold wind swept through the room, scattering papers. The temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath missed it. "We're not alone," Laura whispered, her voice tight with fear. A shadow moved across the wall, dark and menacing. It paused as if watching, before melting into the darkness. "What do you want?" Hannah demanded, her voice trembling. There was no answer, only the faint sound of a baby's cry, as if from far away. But she felt it, the presence, the anger, the sorrow. Whatever haunted the hospital, it was more than just a restless spirit. It was a force born of pain and loss, unable to move on. As the shadow disappeared, Hannah and Laura exchanged a glance. Their fear mirrored in each other's eyes. They knew now that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. The hospital was a place of healing, but it had become something else, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred, where echoes of the past refused to be silenced. They would have to dig deeper, face the darkness head on. Because the whispers were growing louder, the cries more desperate. And if they didn't find a way to help the spirits trapped within these walls, they feared they might become trapped themselves.